It's 1 minute past and we are live on the airwaves or the radio waves or the internet waves. It is so wonderful to be able to do this mixed medium webcast for you today from TechWoman. So one of the big pieces of feedback that we continue to get from our members is you want the opportunity to gather in person. And then we have the other end of the spectrum where we have people who aren't necessarily going into the CBD every day or might live in other communities where we don't have centres that we can host these things in. So fingers crossed this works well today, being able to provide that opportunity for all of those who want to join us to be able to join us. So kia ora, I'm Eva Sherwood. I'm the chair of TechWoman and I'm delighted to be able to welcome you all here today. So we've got a wonderful set of speakers lined up. I don't know how many other people have been to other events this morning or who have other events on this afternoon, but it can be a pretty jam-packed day, International Women's Day, so I appreciate you joining us over your lunch hour. I just want to say thank you to our host sponsors in Christchurch and Auckland with Deloitte, Microsoft in Wellington, and Servian have also helped us out with some catering today. So hopefully you're well snacked in the physical locations, and those joining us online have brought their own. So without much further ado, I will hand over to Amanda Watson, who has brought all of these speakers together. So thank you, Amanda, and I'll leave the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Eva. Kia ora everyone, my name is Amanda Watson and I'm an executive team member of TechWoman and business account manager for Servian. And it is really my pleasure to bring forward for you four presenters today who we have brought together for International Women's Day, the subject of which is Choose to Challenge. So I was quite excited when I heard that this was going to be the topic, Choose to Challenge, because I'd already started thinking and hassling Eva about our next presentation. I was really excited because I work with two team leads who were doing something a little bit different, and I wanted to be able to tell that to our TechWomen members and share their experiences. So when this came up, I was very excited. So our Choose to Challenge this year is going to be about choosing to challenge the norms around supporting fathers and partners who are in the workspace and supporting their partner who has stayed at home in unpaid work, returning back into paid work. And we have some wonderful speakers, as I said, two of my colleagues, but also we have a gender economist and we have a wonderful speaker who is a managing director of a company and done a lot of work in this area. So we're going to turn the tables ever so slightly this time. Rather than encouraging women how to promote themselves and back themselves, we're now going to talk to the people that are there supporting you and backing you and encouraging change in the workplace, pioneering some change in the workplace, in my view, challenging my thinking for certain, and I hope that they can bring some new thoughts to everybody watching. So with no further ado, I'm going to pass over to my first colleague, Joe Owenson, who is a team leader within Servian. And he's going to tell us our story, which prompted me to start thinking outside the box. Over to you, Joe.
Amanda, I did forget one of my very important facilitator notes here. And before Joe starts, we're going to be using Slido to manage the questions today. So for those that haven't used Slido on your phone before, Google Slido. It's the first option that comes up. Otherwise, you can go to app.sli.do. And if you go there and type in TechWoman into the search function, you're going to see our Q&A So you can log your questions the whole way through our speakers today. You can vote on questions that you want answered, so you can look at other people's. You don't have to be putting your own ones up there, and we'll look to make sure that we get through a few of those this afternoon. Apologies, Joe, over to you.
Thanks, Eva, that's great. And thanks for those lovely words as well, Amanda. Hope you can all hear me. And thank you for inviting me to speak today on International Women's Day, particularly as I'm a bloke, and for the opportunity to talk about how we can help support our partners both immediately after birth and on their return to paid employment. You might notice I'm not saying the return to work. This is because I'm really aware of just how much work childcare is. And so the unpaid work is, this is incredibly productive, hugely benefits society. And so I'm conscious not everyone's able to make the choice of whether to return to work or not, or indeed even wants to return to work. So that's my disclaimer, that I support all those options and choices before I get into it. So today I'm going to talk a little about how my wife and I structured things when our daughter was born, and also some of the lesser known policies and legislation that have really helped our family. The journey to meet our daughter was not easy, but that's a topic for another discussion. And I was really fortunate that my employer was supportive right from the start and continues to be so now that Jasmine is here. For the most part, the secondary caregiver will take the 2 weeks after baby arrives and then head straight back to the workplace. And I remember our friends and antenatal instructor talking about the joys of the arrive and survive period, and we knew right then we would need more than 2 weeks. So this, coupled with the fact that we have no family in New Zealand to help, I ended up taking 7 weeks off at the start, and Hannah took the rest. With this in mind, it was really important for us to understand how much parental leave we were entitled to, and so that I could tell my manager way in advance and coverage could be arranged. So we pretty much just checked into the employment.gov website to get an idea of eligibility. And I'll share a few links as we go to a fact sheet, which is in the chat, sorry, the Slido Q&A. So you can see at a glance what you're entitled to. For me, I took 2 weeks unpaid parental leave, 2 weeks annual leave, and then 3 weeks further parental leave, taken from the extended leave portion of parental leave. It sounds a bit complicated, and the entitlement at the time was actually less for when Jasmine was born, but basically what it meant is we had 2 pots of 26 weeks. One pot was the paid primary care leave, the other pot was the unpaid extended leave, and so we chose to share a few weeks of the extended leave between us. And that said, if you're not sure about anything to do with parental leave entitlement, then just reach out to MB and they should be able to help anyway. But hopefully the links that I put up will also steer you in the right direction. So in the end, we were super lucky to have this extra time because we did have an emergency C-section, and our daughter required syringe feeding, which was a 2-person job in those early days. And Hannah also experienced a few complications from the epidural, so it was real relief. We know, we had some extra time to deal with all that too. Since COVID, my employers put in place a lot of extra working from home options, as I'm sure all our other employees have done as well. And this has helped immensely as well. Micro breaks now consist of me playing horsey with Jasmine, which gives Hannah some well-deserved respite from the chaos she leaves behind. The 5-second commute to the office means I'm around in the morning and I'm not rushing home to catch them for dinner and bath time as well. And so it's this flexible working's been super valuable, allowed me to cover like lunchtime naps, for instance, when for Jasmine, which has meant that Hannah could study and attend virtual seminars. She's been recently doing for her postgrad qualification, which she recently got. It's also worth mentioning that while on parental leave, you can choose, if your employer agrees, to perform paid work from time to time, up to a total of 64 hours. These are known as keeping in touch hours. And part of the intention here is that you keep in touch with your employers for things like attending strategy away days, training sessions, and generally checking in with your employer. And I think some people also use it to aid reintegration into the workforce. And so this was a really useful thing for us to know. And combined with the flexible working from home, allowed me to free Hannah up so she could do small pieces of work to keep in touch with the team. Also of note is that you do accrue holiday as well whilst you're on parental leave. And some parents take that as the 13th month after the main parental leave is finished. Also, when Jasmine was 1, we were fortunate enough to take 2 months off. And I'm so very grateful for my employer for enabling me to do this. We love spending this time together as a family, and it helped share the parenting load, which I think Hannah really welcomed, as she'd done much of the heavy lifting to date. And so with Hannah returning to work, we discussed options and decided that we'd ideally like to both work 0.8 of an FTE over 4 days, which meant Jasmine was in daycare for 3 days, leaving us each a day with her. And so this, knowing this would be something that would impact my team, I signaled my intent early on. It must have been quite a bombshell for them to drop, telling them that I wanted to go down to 0.8 and also take a few months off. But my manager, our P&C rep, and members of my team was so accommodating and supportive. It was fantastic. And so now we're trialing a 4-day working week, and I get to spend 1 day a week with my daughter, just me and her, which is really the highlight of my week. That said, we're a 24/7 industry, and so regular check-in every month is required just to see how things are going and if anything needs to be refined so the business doesn't suffer. So yeah, these requests you might may seem progressive right now and an exception to the rule, but I'd like to see these types of decisions become commonplace if we're going to tackle gender inequality. It really is the tip of the iceberg. My wife's employer has some fantastic policies which are available for parents, such as a special period of absence, whereby you can take an extra additional year after parental leave is finished. They also offer an ex gratia payment, which is basically a retention bonus, the equivalent of 6 weeks' pay on return to work. Not to mention up to $3,000 a year paid childcare allowance. So, she works for government as well, and so if they're doing this, imagine what the private sector could do. Parents so busy with daycare drop-offs, pickups, running a house, looking after other family members, and I like to see flexible working by default introduced, where employers are open to a 4-day working week or a 9-day fortnight, for instance. As mentioned, I've been blessed to have a really understanding employer who has allowed me to spend more time with family in those first 1,000 days, so that my daughter can grow, learn, and thrive. For me, I recommend you get informed, read the policies and legislation, and understand what any internal policies your employer might have. And with this increasing focus on well-being for staff, we're starting to see a shift in the mindset, and I'm hopeful that employers will be more open to this type of thinking. Because it affords parents the opportunity to have a genuine conversation about who will take the parental leave or if they want to share it. And it's a change that's slowly gaining momentum. And a couple of my friends have shared the parental leave recently, and they highly recommend it. So I encourage you to have a listen to the Man-Child podcast, which I'll also share in the Q&A. And that discusses being a stay-at-home dad and their take on things. Summing up, I guess I'm creative. I'm all about wanting to create a more inclusive workplace culture. Something I'm really passionate about, and my friend Kev is going to talk to you a little bit more about what he's doing with his team, and touch on this a bit more further on in the preso. So thanks very much for listening. Please check out the links in the Q&A, and thanks once again for having me. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Joe. That's fantastic. Thank you so much. For myself, each time I hear Joe, actually all of our panelists speak today, I learn something new and more things to think about and how things are changing for for the time that I've been working in this industry, and I just want to say thank you very much for sharing. And the information will be in Slido, the links, etc. And if, as we said, when there's a Q&A session, anyone that would like to put in a question, feel free. That was that was a great talk. So as we mentioned, we're now going to introduce Kevin Ha, who is our SQL team lead for New Zealand. He is pioneering some stuff of his own within his team, and can also speak a lot from experience as well, which is what I really enjoy about listening to these two of my colleagues. So I hope you enjoy Kev's speech, and we will roll with it. Kev, off we go.
Hi everyone. Thanks for inviting me to the panel, TechWoman, and thanks, Joe, for that informative information. I honestly wish I knew all about that when I was going through it myself as well. And I think the important thing here is that as men, we need to be a bit more empowered and go find this stuff. And Joe, that's a great example. I think we need to enable others to do this as well. So hi everyone, my name's Kevin, and I'm the SQL Server team lead here at Servian. I've worked at Servian for the last 8.5 years. Our team of 7 is made up of a mum, a few new dads, and those we like to call carefree. I want to acknowledge how grateful I am to Servian, my employer, and my team for supporting me, taking time off for my family. Like Joe, I've taken 5 months off in total to support Jill, my wife, and to look after Elliot, my son, on 2 separate occasions. The first time was, I think I took 3 months off, and that was at the birth of Elliot. So as you can expect, I can't remember much during that time, besides a lot of sleep deprivation and lots of crying, and it wasn't just Elliot. The second time was when Elliot was about to turn 1, and Jill was just returning to work in a part-time capacity. I was the primary caregiver, and this was during the Melbourne lockdown. I'm based in Melbourne, by the way. So to all the dads and dads-to-be out there, thanks for joining. And having a mum in your team is essential. You get all the awesome tips about how to deal with your kids and when to go see a doctor. And if you think you're busy, they'll put you to shame. You've always got time, Kev. Having other dads in the team also helps. We've got something, what I like to call a bit of a freak out group, where you can ask questions and bounce ideas off each other. This is an awesome group where you don't have to freak out alone, especially when your kid comes down with a runny nose or some random rash. It's a great group that offers a lot of sympathies. So I've been asked to talk about what we're trying to do in the team to promote diversity and inclusion. So the first thing I did was schedule a meeting with Michelle and Steffi, the ladies in my team. So thank you very much. I'm sure they're attending today. So I asked, what are some of the things that we're doing right, to promote diversity and inclusion? And make you feel supported. So the first thing that came up and said was, in our team, we promote a real sense of belonging. They feel that they have a voice and they are respected members of the team, equals. Their opinions mattered and their needs were met, not just brushed aside. So for example, what may seem to be a really simple request from Michelle to get a standing desk so that she could be a bit more active at work was expedited. When it arrived, I remember she was over the moon to set it up. So they also said how social the team was. There was that real sense of camaraderie, just like family, actually. So in our team, we listen, we actively engage each other and encourage everyone to participate while ensuring the workplace is a safe environment. Secondly, flexibility was the key for Michelle's decision to join us. I think it was Julia that's starting school. So flexible hours means that she can share pickups and drop-offs responsibilities with her husband. So thinking back in my own experience, personally, two things have really helped me, and I think this will resonate with a lot of the parents out there. Firstly, flexible working hours for general childcare, pickup and drop-off. Secondly, it's the work from home. As Joe mentioned, COVID and the lockdowns have really shown us that we can work effectively from home, especially here in Melbourne, where we've spent 152 days in lockdown. The flexibility has allowed me to support Jill to ease back into work. So if more dads were empowered to do this, I feel we would encourage more mums to return to work and therefore increase diversity in the workplace. The other thing that we have changed in my team is the way that we're advertising for open roles and the interview process to make it more inclusive. So you may have heard of the stat where men apply for jobs when they meet 60% of the criteria, whereas women apply for jobs only if they meet 100%. So we're working really hard to create new job descriptions that are more gender neutral. So for example, rather than say how many years of experience you need to be successful in this role, we focus on the skills instead. We also include important information like on-call, travel requirements, and the frequency of these activities, the flexibility options and the mentoring opportunities within these roles. We've also engaged a more diverse group of reviewers to check that our job descriptions target a wider audience. For the interview process, we've tried to make sure at least 2 other team members are involved and remain involved throughout the process. I think a diverse group of interviewers, so gender, race, work experience, is valuable for assessing the potential candidate. It's also important to have this really good representation during this time, because at the same time, we're trying to sell ourselves to the candidates, that we're a great team to work for, and the organization is the one to choose. So now those are just some of the things that we are doing to implement, a better workplace, especially one that is more diverse and inclusive. So thank you for your time, and I'll hand it back to Amanda.
Oh, thank you so much, Kevin. That was fantastic. That was a really great speech. I have said to both Kevin and Joe over the past week that I truly believe that the changes they are making and pushing for as fathers and as leaders is making a difference. And our children are going to grow up thinking this is normal. And as Kevin and I have said before, we've been out there pioneering things. I did this for you. And I think really there is an element of that with, it's so many changes are happening in my career watching this. So it excites me and inspires me. So thank you. And now I would like to hand over to Avril, who is our gender economist. And having met her and listened to her, I find her fascinating personally, and I hope you do too. Avril, over to you.
Kia ora, thanks Amanda. Ko Ngāti Pākehā te iwi no whanua ke oku tupuna, no Kotirani me Inarangi ko Maclean te iwi, ko te whanganui a tara toku whanua nohu ko Avril aho. So kia ora koutou. Hi, I'm Avril. As you can hear from accent, I am originally from England and Scotland, from the Maclean clan, but I have lived in New Zealand for the last 15 years. And as Amanda said, I'm a very proud and passionate gender economist. And what I'd like to talk to you about today is actions and signals. So for a really long time in the gender space, we've been trying to pass policy and legislation to ensure that women could take actions to remain in the workplace. So for example, being able to take parental leave, being able to request to work part-time. And this is great. We've got a lot of results from this, and you'll see women are now in more senior positions, and we have higher participation rates in the labour market. But the problem is that these actions send signals when mostly only women are asking for these. And that feeds into people's unconscious bias. So yes, we can take parental leave and we can work part-time, but when it's only women doing it, or mostly women doing it, what we have found through studies like Claudia's work, Claudia Godden at Harvard and Izzy Sin at Motu, New Zealand, is that it creates this unconscious bias that because women are doing it, women are more difficult employees, that we can't handle the workplace, and that overall a man would be better to do that job. So what this means is that the really next challenge in terms of achieving gender equality is we need to get more men to take these actions, because when more men take these actions, it neutralizes that signal. So it creates all of these well-being effects that Kevin and Joe have done an amazing job of talking about. But at a really macro level, it also means that the signal gets decreased. And I want to give you guys a really tangible example of that. So we're really lucky in New Zealand that we have pay equity. We're only 2 countries in the world that have it. It's us and I feel like our North American mates, Canada, who are kind of like the New Zealand of North America, I like to feel like. And what pay equity does is that it compares workforces, and it looks at workforces that are female predominant and male predominant. And it looks at all of the skills and responsibilities and the day-to-day life of these workers. And what we have found is that workforces that are female predominant and that tend to have skills that are seen as being compassionate, caring, empathy, collaboration, are paid a lot less than a male dominant workforce that is bringing the same level of skill and the same level of responsibility and a similar working life. And when we bring our economists and our spreadsheets and our numbers, and so I'm sure you tech women do as well, we can find no reason for the difference in the pay of these 2 workforces, other than the fact that one is female dominant and one is male dominant. And it's quite a difference in pay. So if I give you an example that's been public, teacher aides in the last year had a settlement under pay equity, and they got a 32% pay increase. So that's how much they were being paid less, just because they as a woman were doing the work rather than men doing the work. And the part of that I'm actually really, really passionate about isn't just the pay correction, it's the valuation. Because the reason that these skills are being paid less is because they're being valued less, and they're being valued less because it's women doing them. We assume that being caring is a female attribute, and we don't need to pay someone for it. But when a male is seen as being driven or being very technically abled, even though that's seen as being a male attribute, we feel like it's worthy and we should pay for it. But actually, when we look at the future of the labour market, what we can see is that these female dominant attributes, like being compassionate, empathetic and collaborating, are the skills that the New Zealand labour market really needs to have in the next couple of decades to overcome some really massive challenges. I mean, you can't look at our COVID response without knowing there was empathy and collaboration and strong communication all throughout that COVID response. And those are traditionally female attributes. So I guess the reason I wanted to talk to you guys about this is because what we need to have is equal valuation of women's skills as we have men's skills. And we need more men taking up what's seen as being traditionally female actions, like Kevin and Joe have in terms of taking leave and working flexibly, because that's the only way we're actually going to achieve the next level in gender equality. So I guess the challenge I'm putting up to you guys actually is to talk to the men in your life about this. Let them know this is what we need them to do, to step into conversation. Let them know that other men are doing it. Refer them on to Kevin and Joe's talk, but also support them, because it can actually be really difficult for men to do this for the first time. There's a lot of research coming out of the UK that men face more discrimination than women when they do ask to go part-time. But we as women have been fighting for a really long time for gender equality. We know what the men are likely going to face when they ask for this. So this is our time to actually be supporting them, because if we can support them and they take these actions, that's how they support us, and that's how we get gender equality overall. So thanks very much for letting me talk to you about the part that I'm really, really passionate about. And I hope that you talk to the men in your life about how they can take on some of these actions.
Thank you so much, Avril. That I always find what you say fascinating as well. And I was just going to ask you, you've had an experience as well that your hubby also has a personal part to play in this.
Yes, so this is I'm going to ruthlessly shame Joe. So Joe's actually a friend of mine. I met his wonderful wife Hannah at university, and I've been with Joe and Hannah on the Generator meeting. They're amazing jazzmen, and my partner and I went round one day to play with jazz. It was a great time. I think she managed to get a croissant all over the carpet, but it was actually hearing Joe talk about this, about asking to take some time off to be with his family and to go part-time to be able to care for Jasmine. It inspired a conversation with me and my husband, because even though I think I come across as very proudly feminist and very for gender equality, it took for my husband to see Joe doing it and asking to be supported by his workplace to be an equal parent. It showed my husband that that he could ask for that, and particularly for my husband, who's come from a very patriarchal background and a very strict idea of what a man is, he needed to see another man do it. As we as women know that we need to see a woman do a role to know that we can do it, it's the same for men. So that's why it's really important to have Kevin and Joe come to these kind of panels and talk to their experience, because that's how we're going to get more men to feel like they can do it as well. And I mean, that's why it's really great. I've been doing these panels for a really long time. It's the first time I've ever seen men be part of the conversation on the panel as well. And I think I've seen a couple of men in the audience here, which is really great as well. But just encourage more men to, I guess, not only take the actions, but as Kevin and Joe have, to talk about them, because it's incredibly powerful when men do this.
Thank you so much, Avril. That's fantastic. I hope all of you enjoyed Avril's presentation. The question and answer section will be coming up after our next speaker, who is last but by no means least, which is Victoria McLennan, and we will be introducing her after I just give you the health and safety reminder of using Slido for any questions, please, for the question and answer session. Thank you very much. Over to Vic McLennan, who is a managing director and is working a couple of floors above me. Victoria, over to you.
Thank you, Amanda. Kia ora koutou, ko Victoria McLennan toka wingoa, but as my screen label says, for those of you who are on the call, everyone calls me Vic, so please do. Now, listening to Joe and Kevin talking, it just reminded me of my own story, which I hadn't really thought about for a long time. I, as my daughter says, didn't master birth control and had my first baby at the age of 21, and had my daughter some 16 months later at the age of 22. And when she was 3 months old, my partner and their father was made redundant. And this is in the 90s, and this is when fathers didn't stay home. So we basically found ourselves kind of destitute. We'd just come back from our OE with 2 babies, just bought our first house, which cost us $130,000. That just ages me phenomenally, telling you all that, in Kandala. And so we basically had a bet that first one of us to get a job works and the other one stays home and looks after the kids. And I won and was the first to get a job. So 3 months with a 3-month-old baby at home, and I was still breastfeeding, and logistically that was unheard of some nearly 30 years ago now. My then partner stayed home with the children. He was the only dad. He was the only dad at kindy. He was the only dad at school. And it was just such a massive challenge for, you know, and the topic of this is choosing to challenge. It was a challenge for many other parents to really get their heads around. There was this stay-at-home dad, which was unheard of. And now I look at my siblings with their small children, and sometimes I go and pick up nieces and nephews from school, and I see so many dads, and I just think it's fantastic. And hearing Kevin and Joe today, you know, is great. And to many of Avril's points around, we can't imagine being something if we can't see it. So we need to see more men who are taking that primary caregiver role or sharing that caregiver role, which is really important. I'm an employer. I own a few companies and have shares in others and a director of others. So, and that's been my context for many years. I, later on in my career, after 10 years of not working with any other women, finally worked with another woman and then had this epiphany that if I really want to change this, I need to become an employer. And many of you have heard my story about becoming an employer and wanting to really change and challenge the norms and encourage more women into tech and find improved pathways for women in tech. But I noticed on the questions, I've already got a question from Adeline about encouraging your employer when there aren't parental leave policies in place. So I thought I'd just talk briefly about that. First thing, for many of you who aren't employers, to give you some context, if you don't already own your own business, is there's a lot of legislation out there. For us as employers, there's a lot to get our heads around and there's a lot to keep up with. And this Labor government has been prolific with changing legislation, particularly labour market related. And many small businesses don't have an HR person. They don't have people in roles that are focused on keeping track of legislation. So they just miss it and they just don't understand what their obligations are. So it can be quite challenging for small employers to really get their heads around having different policies in place. And as an employee, for all of you, your role is really to help encourage them. And the links that that Joe has shared, share those with your employer. It might be that they've just missed it in all the hundreds of other updates we get. I think I got 4 emails from Inland Revenue last week about payroll changes. You know, it is prolific. I can't stress that enough. So sharing the information with your employer in a really constructive way will be really helpful, particularly if you're in a small business. The other context I often hear from people they struggle with is when they work for a multinational and they don't necessarily have anyone who's in country responsible for HR policies, employment and payroll policies. And so that can be quite challenging. If your manager is in country or if your manager is offshore, it can be even more challenging. But even if you work for a multinational, New Zealand employment laws are the law that pertains to you as an employee. So their obligation is to honour New Zealand employment laws. So again, you might need to have to take a bit of a role in trying to educate them, because that can be quite challenging with multinationals where their headquarters in the United States and their employment laws, as many of us know, can be quite different to New Zealand employment laws, and I don't believe they have paid parental leave. So Joe made a really good point about keeping up to date with the legislation and keeping in touch with it, and that goes for both ways. The one that I really like, the point that Joe made, which I only discovered as an employer when I had an employee come back from a work break recently for parental leave, was that me being able to pay them to start reintegrating into the workforce in small chunks of time without kind of having a sudden day where they have to come back and they start being a part-time or full-time paid employee. So that's a fantastic opportunity. As a flexible employer, I could have done that anyway. I just hadn't thought of it, to be honest. And then when I discovered that was an option, then certainly invoked that as soon as I learned about it. So that's something that you could also educate your employers about. Kevin made some really good points about flexibility. And this is something that some of you have probably heard me talk about before. It's can be quite hard to get some employers, particularly males, I'm going to be horribly genderist here, to really understand what flexible working is. And flexible working means my kid fell off the swings on the playground, I'm called by the school, I have to drop everything and go home. Flexible working is not, you can start at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday and a Thursday. Flexible working has to be true flexibility. And that takes a team effort to re-educate some employers. So to Kevin's point about talking to the women in his team about what they really need, and to all of the women here who have children and who understand what you really need, start trying to educate your male colleagues and getting them on the same page as you and really understanding it and putting it in terms that they get. If they've got children, they're far more likely to understand what you're talking about. If they don't have children, it will take them a while to kind of get their heads around it. But there is strength in numbers, and if you can get many of your colleagues to be on the same page as you and you're all singing from the same song sheet, that's really important too. And again, many of you have probably heard me tell the story about when I didn't have pay equity at one point early in that employment, and I was in my mid-20s, back in the workplace, discovered that the men that I worked with earned tens of thousands of dollars more than me. The Servian team will like this, being a DBA on call 24 hours a day, that makes a big difference in your life when you're not being paid as much as your colleagues. But I was really lucky that those male colleagues stood beside me to talk to our employer and to get me pay equity with them at a time when our laws didn't demand that they had to do that, and at a time when there was still an attitude that males are the breadwinner, therefore need to earn more than women. And yet I was the breadwinner in my family, and that argument for me hadn't flown on my own until I got my male colleagues standing alongside me and supporting me in that argument and did get pay parity. So the more that you can do to encourage your colleagues to be on the same page as you, and you're all kind of singing from the same song sheet and talking about these issues, I think the better your outcome is going to be. So Adeline, I hope that answers your question. The last thing I just want to talk about is there are other reasons for people to take work breaks, not just for having children. And so something to be really mindful of is that people take work breaks for lots of different reasons, and helping them reintegrate back into the workforce after a work break can mean different things to different people. It could be because of an illness that they've had, or an illness that another family member's had, or they've been looking after an elderly parent. It's no longer usually because they've gone travelling for 12 months around Southeast Asia or South America, but there will be different reasons why people come back into the workplace and have work breaks, and that can be challenging. So again, if you work together as a team, and the advice that Kevin gave, to help people feel really welcome when they come back into the workplace, because it can be quite intimidating stepping into an existing team with existing DNA. The way we do things around here is quite ingrained. So thinking about people when they come back from a work break and making them feel really welcome and really comfortable and supported is something that all of us can do every day. So I hope that this was helpful to give you a bit of a perspective for from what your employers are trying to figure out and how you can encourage your employer. But I just take on board all of the points that Joe, Kevin and Avril made. And to reiterate that point, you can't be what you can't see. We need more women in digital technology generally, which is incredibly important. We've gone from 24% to 27% of the workforce in the last 5 years, which is great, but it's still not enough. And we need to see more men who are sharing that childcare and working flexibly, so that others will also see that they can do that too. Enjoy the rest of the day. Back to you, Amanda. Thanks.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you, Vic. That was a great speech, great presentation, and very fair point when you pointed out you were the primary caregiver. So both you and your husband were quite pioneering. I mean, back in the 90s, that was very rare that the switch would happen. And of course, that wasn't considered that, yes, you were the primary earner, yet why should you get that wage? Yes, so there we go. We've come a long way since then, which is, you know, why I think this presentation is really important. So now we're going to go to some questions. So we've had one for Adeline answered. I've got a couple others lined up that you can see. So the next one that I'm going to bring up, I think, is probably going to be for Avril or Vic, which is from Anonymous. Do you think that legislation that provides an amount of parental leave to each partner that cannot be shared would encourage men to take it?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And I should say that I've also got a law background, so things like this make me excited because I think that they should. And I've been asked this in my work a couple of times, and the answer I always give is let's compare two countries that have this legislation in place. So one of them is Denmark. In Denmark, both parents, I think, can take up to a year paid leave for the first year of the baby's life, and have additional something crazy like 3 months that they can take over the next 7 years of each child's life. And we do find higher uptake rates for men to take parental leave and using that policy. But the other country that has that is Japan. Japan actually has the most generous parental leave provision, and it has the lowest uptake rate in the developed world. So yes, if I can use my favorite Kiwi phrase of yeah nah, because yes, it might, but the real issue is that parental leave is really an enabler of what society wants. If society wants men to be taking parental leave, then a legislation that puts something in place like that of equal provision will be uptaken. But we've also seen countries that have put a legislation in place where both parents can take shared, and that's if both parents are the same gender or not, and they have very, very low uptake rates. And in fact, that was Denmark's experience. So Denmark went to equal shared parental leave. I think it was in the 1970s. That's when they swapped over to being in a social insurance model. And for about 3 decades, they struggled to get men to take it at all. One study found that in 1980s, I think, they had uptake rates that coincided perfectly with national sports days throughout the year. And they've moved on massively since then, but it's actually been more because of culture change that then led to legislation change. So I just always try to bear in mind, a legislation like parental leave is a permissive legislation. It's not saying you have to, it's more saying it's here if you want it. And we can put that into place, but what we have to get is society to actually want it. That's just my views. Vic, what do you think?
I believe there are some companies in New Zealand that already offer this as a policy, that even though that it's not a requirement of them in law, and they've come up with flexible policies to enable parents to share that leave. It is more complicated if it's not in legislation. So I definitely, to answer the question, if it was in legislation, I think that would encourage more, it would make it easier and cleaner for employers to offer. It's kind of like the legislation to buy back some of your leave when people have excessive amounts of leave, and as an employer we can buy up to 5 days or pay out up to 5 days of that leave a year. There's no flexibility to enable us as employers to pay out 10 days of leave. It'd be great if that could be flexible as well, which might also help with some of these. So yes, I think it should be a change in legislation, and yes, I think that would encourage more.
So possibly, because of course Denmark was again very forward thinking, but the culture wasn't ready for it. Maybe now that the culture is ready for it, there could be some movement within the legislation. Might be time to readdress.
Yeah, I bet it just add one thing though. The important part is that what we found is that countries that don't uptake it is where the income payment is too low. So in New Zealand's current scheme, it's supposed to be a 40-hour minimum wage rate, and what we know now is that most families will not be able to get by on a 40-hour minimum wage rate of one parent. So if you wanted to have a parental leave system that could be used by both parents at the same time, we would have to look at the income abatement provisions as well, because most families would not be able to basically get by if even 2 parents being paid a 40-hour minimum wage rate. It's too much of a drop compared to their actual needs.
Okay. Thank you for that. Thanks, Avril and Vic, for answering that. The next one that we have will be for Joe and Kev. Our next question today is, how did your friends and family react to you taking more time than usual males when you became a dad? Were there any negative reactions?
I'll go first if you want, Kev. Or do you want to
go for it. No, you go.
All right. My friends over here in New Zealand were super supportive. A couple of them have already done it, and it didn't feel like it was a big ask for me. And they were it was just something that happens. My friends in the UK, a little bit different. I don't think that's really, none of them in my group over there really have done anything like this before, and certainly family as well back in the UK. I didn't get any negative reactions or anything like that. Just questions, just surprised really, thinking, oh, you can do that. How interesting. I didn't get the sense of any negativity or anything like that. So yeah, I think I've been quite lucky really. The guys in New Zealand don't really bat an eyelid really. It's just ask for it, see what happens. And so in that regard, I've been pretty lucky really. I don't know how you feel about it, Kev.
Yeah, look, exactly the same. So Jill and I are the first ones to have babies in our close-knit friend group, and I think because of that, I was in a great position to say, this is what I'm doing, and I think all the other dads need to be doing the same thing. And so yeah, they were all very interested in terms of, oh man, how do you do that? What did you do? And you know, one of the ways that I was trying to encourage others to do this in my own social circle was to show them the amount of love and the amount of awesome interactions that you could get with your kid on a day-to-day basis that you would never get if you don't take this opportunity, right? And they only grow up once. And I remember someone keeps saying that to me. And this is the thing: as long as you keep positive in terms of how you approach this, and you just make sure that, you know, people are actually watching you and looking at how you're doing things, you'll be a really good role model for other dads as well.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kevin Joe. Right, so we have about 5 or 6 minutes left. We have a couple more questions. If you'd like to put any questions in through Slido, please do. The next question, I'm going to open it up. I think I'm going to interpret this correctly, so I'll start off with my sort of answer. So many women decide to be the primary caretakers of the kids due to the high opportunity cost of having their husband stay at home. What are your thoughts? So if we're thinking that the high opportunity cost is exactly what we've talked about with the gender pay gap equality, and parents, as we have on our panel today, have sat down together and gone, who earns the highest out of both of us? Who has the better career trajectory at this point in time? How can we pay all our bills? Where will we be more supported? How much is childcare? Whose auntie lives down the road? You know, all of those factors take into consideration. I think these questions are changing things now, as we've demonstrated today. Is my personal view. I think the high opportunity cost of having husbands at home is changing. I think what we've heard today about the opportunities of people being able to work a 4-day week together as a unit instead of a 5-day week means things will be changing. And I think that's coming through to senior leadership teams as well, that all of this question in particular has been answered. Is there anyone else that would like to jump in here?
I would just add, I guess, one of the things that really frustrates me that I hear from women all the time is how they feel penalised for having a work break. So when they're trying to return to the workforce, having had a work break for 2, 3, 5 years, employers then say your experience is old, it's not current. That work break means we won't put you into as senior a role as you were in before. And to me, that's just a fallacy. So we learn so many more skills when we're parents anyway, and whatever our work break is, we usually learn many more skills. All of those transferable skills that we had before, other than very niche technical things where the technology's moved on really quickly, but leadership skills and other skills that are quite transferable, having had a work break should be completely irrelevant. So there is definitely a mind shift change that is required. That means that whether it's a male or female parent, when they take a work break, they're not penalised for that work break when trying to return into the workforce. And I know that doesn't directly answer the question, but it does frustrate me, and that is something that I'm on a bit of a hobby horse about at the moment, trying to encourage fellow employers to be a lot more open-minded about people taking work breaks and why they've taken those breaks and what they can bring to the company irrespective of the recency of their experience.
Thank you, Beck. Yes, and it's actually something that TechWomen, do. It's a subject we approach quite often because we know that our listeners are possibly in a position where they're, going to take parental leave, thinking about parental leave, have people in their team, etc. So I think it's something that will continue to be answered, and an example of today's panel as well, pushing that forward. We have just a few more minutes to go. One other question, which I thought was quite good. So again, I'll open the floor. Putting parental considerations aside, what are other ways men can help support organisations to integrate feminine qualities such as empathy and collaboration? And I know that there are many gentlemen in my company that think like this, and and have pointed this out. So I'll open the floor. Who would like to answer?
I think it's some. Oh, sorry, Kev. I jumped in again before you. You go.
It's okay. It's okay. I just need to find the mute button a lot quicker. That's all right. You go, Joe.
Yeah. So our company, we're really lucky. They're big into learning and development, and not just strictly dry technical skills. You know, they offer a whole sort of range of trainings, and they push a lot on the whole EQ space and self-awareness, and they mainly like on a seniority track of competencies as you're going through the business. And yeah, you know, these type of things are just the type of things they offer. I'm trying to think what else they do, Kev, within our Servian university, but for the most part, these sort of soft skills, they make a push. They see a lot of value in it, and it's, you know, it's not just us being techies anymore. You can't really do that, and it's you know, machines will be doing that soon enough anyway. So we've got to do something else.
Yeah, so there's definitely a lot of learning material that Servian provides to help us grow in that space. But also, I think, well, what men can do is actually, you know, even if you're not in the leadership position, you should be engaging with your female colleagues to encourage them to, you know, speak up, for example, or say things that are on their mind, you know, that help them have that medium and help them have that voice, right? You know, if you're talking about something, you know, you could try and lead it into a female colleague. Oh, what do you think, Amanda? You know, stuff like that, you know, and then that's how you kind of build that that environment where it's conducive for, you know, learning, right? Where, you know, you've got that empathy and that collaboration.
Thank you very much. Thanks, guys. Yes, and the other way, as Kev pointed out, was the wording in job adverts, which we've touched on as tech women before, making them more gender neutral, more appealing to the way other people may be thinking.
Amanda, there's also a great course if you don't work for Servian that Spiral Dev Academy offer called Engineering Empathy. It's workshop based, in person. You role play, which I think is just a fantastic way for many people to learn about working with different people and learning different perspectives and seeing the context of the other person. So
are you able to put that into our chat, Vic?
Yep, I can do that.
Thank you. So we're going to wrap up now, and personally myself, I would just like to say thank you very much. Thank you to everyone that's dialed in virtually, from home, from the office, in Wellington, Auckland and Christchurch, in the venues. Particular thanks obviously to our wonderful speakers. I felt very passionate about this one, as I do for anyone that knows me. I do tend to get a bit passionate, so I was quite excited with this. So I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. I'm just going to hand over to Eva for the last word of the day, and we will see you next time.
I'm so lucky to get the last word of the day. So thank you all for joining us. I just want to, I guess, say this event has been really special to me, because one of the things that I've learned, having been the chair of this TechWoman organisation for the last 4 years, it is not all about women, and it is so important for us to think holistically about our society and actually the impact that men and the leaders that you are and the people that you are at home, and how that impacts the overall success of our society. It's so wonderful to be able to have a kōrero like this with all of you, and we're starting to, I think, change the conversation from fixing women to actually fixing our society, and that we're all part of that journey. So thank you all for coming today, and I look forward to seeing you very soon, probably at Tech Week coming up in a couple of months.